All right, so the question for today, I'm afraid I might be too vanilla for my partner. I'm feeling a bit lost and overwhelmed. My partner is really into kink, and I'm fairly new to it. I want to explore kink and share this experience with her, but I constantly feel pressure that I might not be kinky enough for her, and I'm worried it might eventually affect our relationship if I'm not able to meet her expectations. I think one way of reframing the question is, how do you deal with a submissive who has more experience in kink than you do?
Yeah, I guess one of the big things I get out of this question is his trouble is, as many people struggle with, the challenge of keeping the relationship together is interfering with his ability to figure himself out and what is it like to truly be himself, in the sense that maybe he's not as kinky as she is. And what he's worried about is the relationship falling apart. And that's what's creating the pressure to perform, rather than the sense of, I just need to figure out how to be myself sexually, and then she can take it or leave it. And especially in early dating, that's the whole point of dating on some level, is to move to a place of greater and greater intimacy where you are truly authentically being yourself, being vulnerable enough to show your partner your true inner authentic self, and then they can take it or leave it. That is actually the situation with dating. Now, as dating progresses toward greater and greater levels of commitment, ultimately in marriage, one of the challenges is that if you have not shown each other your authentic self before you get married, or if some piece of that authentic self undergoes some massive transformation, then you may now be in this situation where you've made a commitment that is in some way incompatible. And I talk a lot about how to negotiate those things in my book, but the way to avoid it is for this young man to stop focusing on preserving the relationship. That's what I call closeness. That committed, comfortable, secure aspect of relationships, which is important, but kink is not about that. And if you try to bring that into kink, you end up with all kinds of twistedness that leads to it not working. You need to figure out just how to be yourself.
In your book, you actually delineate the difference between closeness and intimacy in a way that I found very helpful. So you mentioned the word closeness. Can you just define what that is, and in the context of this conversation, as well as the difference between closeness and intimacy?
Sure. The core of it is that every relationship, every love bond has two aspects. One is the bond itself, and the other aspect is the individual natures of the people participating in it. So one way to think about it is that there are two people, and then there's the relationship itself, the thing that ties them together. A lot of relationship negotiation, even friendship, let alone romantic relationship, but a lot of relationship negotiation is the compromising process of, well, where do you want to go to eat? Where do I want to go to eat? What's the thing in the middle? What can we do? Hey, we went to your parents' place for Christmas last year. We'll go to my parents' place this year, right? The compromising and navigation. You want to have sex twice a day. I want to have sex twice a year. Okay, we'll meet somewhere in the middle, right? Except that last example doesn't really work out for anyone, right? Because sex is a matter of intimacy. It's not negotiable in the same way that dinner is negotiable. You end up, rather than having a happy compromise, you end up with two unhappy people, because the need for intimate engagement is the need to authentically be fully yourself while being aware of the other person and allowing yourself to be witnessed. And so the intimate space is being fully aware and inhabiting your own true inner nature without being disconnected. And that's why sex is, we say it, if you say, have you had sex with someone? Have you been intimate with them? We use this language because we have a cultural understanding that that sex is a prototype for intimacy. The other prototype for intimacy is playfulness. And there's a reason why in BDSM we call it sex play or kink play, have you play partners, right? We use all this play language, pain play, pet play, right? The reason we use the language of play is that's the other model of intimacy. And when you can see that in little kids, the example I give in the book is it's serious play. It's, hey, no, I want to be the Red Power Ranger, and you can't be the Red Power Ranger because I'm already the Red Power Ranger, and there aren't two. That's not how it works. If some adult comes through and says, well, why can't you just both be the Red Power Ranger? That's fucking not how it works. And the kids will reject that because that is interfering with the intimacy of their play, the desire to make it somewhat real, to really inhabit that frame of the Red Power Ranger, right? The odd thing about kink and about sex and about intimacy is the frame you are inhabiting rather than the Red Power Ranger. The frame you are inhabiting is your full self, warts and all, including the parts that we suppress because they're not socially acceptable, right? The part that wants to hurt my partner because it turns me on sexually, right? Or humiliate my partner, right? So I went on a long tangent despite my intention not to.
If I was to bring it back to Opie's question over here, it would seem that he is obviously close to this person or that he's in a relationship with. He describes her as his girlfriend. But the fact that he is insecure about his ability to dominate her because he's not as experienced with her is perhaps him not being intimate with her, him not fully even sharing that vulnerability with her. Would it be a sign of moving upwards in intimacy if he actually disclosed to her that, hey, I think I want this too, but I'm just getting started here, so I'm going to ask you to be patient, right? And to not be afraid, even in the act of disclosing this, that being seen as perhaps an inexperienced dominant is going to be a deal breaker. Or even if it is, he accepts it for what it is.
I think it's that last part, right? But fear and kink cannot coexist in some sense, right? Like, kink suffers no cowards. Part of this is the willingness to say, hey, this is how and that's the ultimate in dominance, right? Is, hey, this is how I want to dominate you. If you don't want to submit to it, go find someone else. Like, this is my dominance, right? So I am asserting this is my self. This is how I want to dominate you. You can submit to that or not. That's your choice, right? But you can't tell me to go be somebody else. And he's missing that frame. He's still in a bit of a submissive frame because he's trying to please her. That's not dominance. There's a missing aspect. I mean, it is actually, that's not true either. That is also dominance. But part of the thing that's poisoning this interaction is that if he were able to, if she's like, oh, I want you to do more, if he could frame, I don't want to do more, and you're the submissive in this situation, then she has a choice to leave the relationship or not. Right? But he's at least presented a strong, dominant assertion that this is what interests me, period. Now, if you need something else, and I don't even love the term more there, right? We're framing it as more, and maybe that's true in some ways, but something else. If you want something else as the form of dominance you want to submit to, it means you want someone else, because that's not who I am, right? Now, the challenge here is he doesn't know who he is. He's new, he's just getting started, and the problem is that the fear is getting in the way of him even finding out who he is. Because rather than steering in the direction of what turns me on, he's steering in the direction of, can I do the thing she wants the way she wants it? And that's closeness, not intimacy. Actually, that's a great example.
He's trying to conform to her expectations because that's correct. What he thinks she wants, and yet that is the least dominant frame of mind to have, right? So by caring too much, right? Why did the relationship fail? Oh, I just cared too much, right? In some somewhat facetious
in this
way.
Particular way. No, I think that we culturally make this mistake, the notion that caring is expressed as closeness. Right? That is the sacrificial aspect of love, the willingness to subvert my own desires for the sake of the relationship, for the sake of the other But that is the closeness frame. And there's all these books, Mars and Venus and love languages, and talking about closeness. And other than mine, there are very few books talking about intimacy. Esther Perel actually also gets this. So Mating in Captivity is another, she gets it, right? At least the edges of it. I don't think she dives in quite as explicitly into kink as I do, but she understands the nature of intimacy in a way that most authors don't, right? So I have a huge negative take on Come As You Are, which is another sort of sex life help book. And I think Nagoski just fundamentally doesn't understand intimacy. She doesn't understand eroticism the way Esther Perel does. And they're almost on opposite ends of the spectrum. I'm definitely more in the Esther Perel camp. And all of these books, the notion of loving is, do you really love someone if you never show them yourself? Who you really are, what you really want, right? Or have you constructed an illusion that is running that relationship, and you only get love insofar as you fulfill that illusion?
Yeah, because they're not really loving you. They're loving the illusion you have weaved of who you actually are, right? So
Correct.
So they'll love you for as long as you can keep the illusion up, I suppose, which is a losing proposition.
They'll never really love you because you haven't shown up to be loved. The relationship will continue for as long as you can maintain that illusion. But they might love you. You just never showed up. So you never gave them a chance.
That's the biggest irony, is to have the vulnerability to make that leap and see if the person you're with will accept you for who you are, right? And there's something very integrating about that, right? Because you end up showing that shadow side. We've talked about this before multiple times. And then somebody sees your shadow for what it is and accepts you as you are. And that is a very powerfully integrating sort of experience. You feel like I am loved in not even despite of, but almost because of.
Because of, that's it.
Who I am, right?
That's it. And I think what's interesting reading this post is it sounds a lot like he is doing this to himself. I'm not convinced that she's particularly unhappy with his dominance based on the tone of his post, right? This is fear and insecurity and getting in his head because he's not comfortable owning himself. I don't necessarily hear any, maybe she is. I'm not in that relationship, right? But the pressure he's putting on himself, the fear, all of those things, I think it's a lot of him creating the situation for himself. And frankly, one of the other forums I follow is HL Community. I've probably mentioned that to you before. And so many people get in their heads about sex and then can't enjoy it because they are creating pressure. And in the worst of scenarios, and he's leaning in that direction, they make it the partner's problem to say, you are putting too much pressure on me. You need to change how you communicate. And then the partner ends up dancing to this jig of this impossible to satisfy set of conditions because the person hasn't owned that, oh, it was my insecurity. It's my fear that needs to be figured out. And nothing that my partner can do will actually relieve that.
Let me try to explicate him just a little bit, recover some of this dignity of his that you have. So one source of such anxiety could be the notion that if he cannot be dominant enough, he doesn't spank her hard enough or do the sort of all of the things that she wants, then she will leave him and then someone else will do that to her instead, right? And there's almost an emasculating sense of that, right? Because if they break up because he hasn't spanked her enough or tied her down sufficiently enough or done all the things, in his mind, he's like, okay, now she's going to be with someone else who's going to be able to do that better. And as you know, for women and for kink as well, they don't go backwards in the dominance experience that they have, right? They don't go from someone who is able to sufficiently dominate them enough, right? All the ways that they want, go from there to someone who is just able to half-ass it 50-50, right? That going backwards is a very difficult maneuver, I think, for a lot of women, right? And so his anxiety might be stemming from, okay, this is what she wants. This is what I think I also want, but I need to speed up my progression perhaps, because if I don't, she's going to find someone who can give her what I can't give her, right? And there's something uniquely emasculating about that because kink is, as you said, it's very intimate, right? So if she wants to just be owned by somebody, right, completely dominated, completely submit to somebody, and he feels that he's not pushing those buttons, in his mind, he's like, there's a man out there that can do that, right? And that's such a powerful drug for a lot of people that, if there's someone who can actually, if she can actually arm branch to that tree, then I've lost this person. So I'm sympathetic 100% to the degree of his anxiety, right? Because it's kink after all, right? This is not a matter of she needs a better lifestyle, and so perhaps she may go and date someone richer than me. That is even somewhat emasculating, right? But this, I think, it really cuts deep. This degree of sort of insecurity of being emasculated by the next boyfriend, right, who may be better than he is in this respect. So, or it even may be, in fact, not even a future potential boyfriend, but he perhaps knows, because she's experienced, of course, that she has had partners in the past who have been able to give her a sufficient degree of dominance. So he's mentally also comparing himself to her past experiences and wondering, okay, am I more dominant than the other people she's been? Because the answer to that can't be no, then have him feel good about himself. Having said all that, I think the advice you gave is still exactly on point, right? Is that he above all has to be true to himself, right? That's the starting point of his...
I'm not sure I agree with that, because you could stretch that out into almost any kink. So you meet a girl who wants to have nails driven through her tits. Like, okay, it's not my kink, right? And it's arguably more intense than any of my kinks, right? That's not something I'm interested in, right? But I'm very comfortable saying, hey, cool, like, go, I hope you find your partner, right? It's not me.
I think that gets easier with the edge cases, right? So I'm not into CNC, for example, right? And if somebody else is, I'm like, that's just not me, right? And that's fine.
Sure,
so
but
at the edges...
But what that comes down to is I'm comfortable with the fact that that's not who I am, right? And so if she goes and finds some dominant who likes to do that and is into it, I don't feel emasculated by that he was more kinky and more dominant because he wanted to do this that I would. And if you really can own your authentic self, there's really not much difference between that and, you wanted me to spank you harder and I wasn't into it, right? I think the key step there is owning your own limits and saying, this is who I am. I think he has a reasonable problem because he doesn't know what his own limits are. He's never done it, right? So that in that uncertainty, I think the fear can crop up. But again, if you let go of this notion of more and less, although it's not totally off base. So I'm not going to say that, arguably the dominant who is interested in putting nails through a girl's tits is more kinky than I am. I think there might be some truth to that, but I'm okay with that. Just like there are guys who are taller, there are guys who are more athletic than I am. Like there's guys who are more in any given domain than I am in lots of ways. And I can't operate on a basis of fear in any relationship as a result.